We need to talk about the book that's currently taking the world by storm right now. I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy is now the #1 New York Times bestselling book in nonfiction as I'm making this video. And that is quite a feat, so congratulations to Jennette McCurdy. Most of us who know McCurdy are familiar with her work on Nickelodeon. She played Sam Puckett on iCarly, as well as a spin-off of iCarly and Victoria's called Sam and Cat, where she co-starred along with Ariana Grande, who shot completely into celebritydom right after Sam and Cat ended, and then you didn't really hear too much about Jennette McCurdy after that. I used to pop in every now and again on her Instagram, and I would see that she's doing like little projects here and there, and one time I saw that she was hosting some show or podcast that she titled I'm Glad My Mom Died. It's a controversial title that a lot of people have not taken well to, but I knew exactly what she meant from the moment that I read it, before I even knew her story, before I even knew her background or anything like that. I am someone who loves my mother, and I have an absolutely great relationship with my mother. She's an amazing person. But I also know that that's not everybody's experience, and I also really get Jennette's sense of humor, so the minute I read that title, I knew that it was hyperbole, but I also knew that it was candor, and I knew that it meant that she had a very complicated relationship with her mother, whose death probably did upset her and make her sad or whatever, but ultimately freed her and gave her some kind of deliverance. And that's what this book is about. It's about the complicated relationship that she had with her mother and the road to peace that she was able to find after her mother's death. Jennette McCurdy grew up in California, and by the time she was 6 years old, her mother forced her into acting. Debra McCurdy, Jennette's mother, had her own ambitions of being an actor, but that failed, so her daughter became a receptacle for her own dreams, as well as a vehicle through which she can live vicariously. And Jennette, being a daughter who just wants nothing but her mother's love and approval, just went along with whatever her mother did. And this is common. There are parents who push their children into things that they don't want to do, but it was more than that for Jennette and her mother. Debra was an extremely toxic and manipulative person. She emotionally and physically and mentally abused Jennette, as well as other members of their family. She manipulated and gaslighted and guilted Jennette into doing everything that she wanted her to do and being everything that she wanted Jennette to be. She didn't allow Jennette to grow up or to have a childhood or to come into her young adulthood. She literally had control and a hold on every aspect of her life, and it was really, really difficult and disturbing to read about, because Jennette also talks about how her mother used to bathe her, like shower her and give her genital exams up until she was like 16, 17 years old. That is fucked up. On top of that, Jennette talks a lot about her struggles with eating disorders that also came out of her relationship with her mother, who herself, I believe, was anorexic, who practiced calorie restriction, and who introduced Jennette to calorie restriction because she felt like Jennette was too fat and she needed to remain skinny so that people in Hollywood would give her jobs. And so Jennette ended up developing anorexia because of her mother and the insecurities that her mother instilled in her, as well as the calorie restriction diet that she put her on. After her death, Jennette's anorexia would then turn into bulimia. So she suffered on so many levels and in so many ways because of her mother. But the thing about this is that Jennette never really realizes this. She never fully comes to terms with this because she loved her mother so much. She wanted nothing but her mother's approval, and she felt as though as if her mother had her best interest at heart, right? And if you are a young child who loves your parent, you will listen to everything that they say. You will idolize them. You will think that everything that they do is for your own good. And you may not recognize until you get older some of the, flaws in the way that they parented you. And I think lots of people go through that, and it's usually not that big of a deal, but it is that big of a deal for people with abusive parents, but not just abusive parents who their abuse is obvious and the child recognizes and understands that they're being abused from young, but whose abuse is not obvious, whose abuse is more covert, right? And whose abuse is not necessarily expressed as abuse or perceived as or understood as abuse. This is the power of gaslighting and emotional manipulation. You could be in an abusive relationship with somebody and not know because that person gaslights you, right? Gaslighting is when an abuser in a relationship tries to convince you that your perception of reality isn't real, and what they think and what they're doing and their narratives of what's happening is the true reality. So in many ways, Jennette was gaslit. But more than gaslighting, she was straight up manipulated by her mother into thinking that her mother had her best interests at heart, when her mother never really did have her best interests at heart. When her mother, I don't want to say her mother never really loved her, but her mother's love was corrupted by her own desires, by her own dreams, by her own ideas of who she thinks her daughter should be, and by her own toxic tendencies and traits. It was truly disturbing to read about that relationship. And I think that's why this is an important book, because so many people are in abusive relationships, whether it be a parental thing, an intimate partner thing, siblings. You know, lots of people do not recognize when somebody is being abusive to them, especially when it's a person that you love, when it's a person that you're supposed to trust, when it's somebody who you think has your best interest at heart. It's difficult for people to recognize that as abuse because sometimes you don't know anything else. You don't know love in any other way besides that. And also, you just don't want to accept the fact that this person that you love, this person who's supposed to be protecting you, you know, who's supposed to be your guardian or whatever, is doing this to you. I'm proud of Jennette for coming to this realization, talking about her deliverance and talking about her healing. I'm not going to get into that because I think you should obviously just read the book. But I'm really grateful that she is offering her story because I think that this could be so immensely helpful to some people. Let's talk about Nickelodeon. Okay, I have a lot to say about Nickelodeon. First of all, she spends a bit of time talking about someone named the creator, who was like the person that I presume created Sam and Cat as well as iCarly, and was a main producer on Nickelodeon. I wonder who that could be. We know who she's talking about. You know who she's talking about, but Google it if you don't. She talks about how he was also abusive, how he was creepy, and this is not just Jennette, right? Jennette, amongst other people who have worked for Nickelodeon, talked about this man touching them inappropriately, not just being inappropriate and downright pedophilic, but also emotionally abusing them and, you know, making them feel like they have to listen to him and do what he says because otherwise their career could come to an abrupt end, or if they want to like succeed in this industry, they need to listen to him. Oh, it was so terrible. It was so horrible. And the fact that, you know, Jennette was dealing with this from her boss, from the person who is, you know, directing her, and then has to go home to her mother. Like, it was abuse on all ends. This poor child did not have any avenue to get away from people who wanted nothing but to exploit her, to use her body and her labor and her likeness for their own gain. And it was truly, truly sick. But we need to talk about Miss Ariana Grande. Butera. Ariana was obviously Jennette's co-star on Sam and Cat, and they didn't particularly have a super friendly relationship. I'm not sure if they had a bad relationship because Jennette doesn't necessarily go into detail with her relationship with Ariana. Interestingly, she goes into detail about how she felt about Ariana around that time. Spoiler alert, she didn't like Ariana. And the reason for that didn't really have anything to do, well, at least from what we were able to read in this book, it didn't have anything to do with Ariana's personality or who she was as a person or whether she was mean or anything. Jennette doesn't go into detail about how Ariana was, but it had to do with Ariana's career. Around this time was when Ariana was launching into the stardom that we know her for today. She would film Sam and Cat, and then she would need time off or days off or weeks off even to go and film music videos and record for her new album and sing at award shows and all that kind of stuff. Jennette, conversely, had to cancel some of her bookings and some movies and other gigs that she booked throughout her time on Sam and Cat so that she can devote her time to Sam and Cat. Nickelodeon didn't allow her to do anything else, but yet they were allowing Ariana to, you know, blossom into stardom because obviously Nickelodeon wanted to follow the Disney formula and have their protege, right? Their Miley Cyrus, their Hilary Duff, their Selena Gomez. They hadn't really had that at that point. And Ariana is now the biggest female pop star in the world if we're talking about like, you know, the streaming era. This is the person who Jennette had to be an equal with on a show. This is the person who she had to compare herself to. And you can't imagine, like I can't imagine what that did to insecurities, you know, as a young person. The way that we compare ourselves to each other, it's really, really damaging. And she worked with Ariana Grande. That can't be easy, especially when Ariana was clearly being treated better by the network than Jennette was. I completely understood why Jennette resented her, why she felt jealous and envious of Ariana, and why she outright didn't like her. Something that we all know is that jealousy and envy are very common, but the people who are being jealous and envious never actually admit that. They usually like to convert their jealousy into something else. Oh, she's a bitch. She's a terrible person. She said this to me once. Da 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 da, blah 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 blah. It's like, no, she's not really a terrible person. You're just jealous. You're just envious. And you know what? That's okay. It's okay to be jealous and envious. It is a natural human emotion. We all have insecurities. We all compare ourselves to people. And in the process, we develop envy. We develop an envious feeling towards people who have the things that we have, who've had privileges that we never had. Ariana grew up rich. Jennette grew up poor. Ariana grew up in a stable household. Jennette did not. Ariana had a lot that Jennette ever wanted, and not just in terms of fame, but in terms of just like family and support systems and financial security. You can't blame Jennette for feeling the way that she felt about Ariana, especially at that young, tender age, especially after having gone through what she went through with her mother, with the creator. It was a terrible experience for her. And I think a true sign of maturity is when somebody is able to recognize when they are envious or jealous of somebody. It's a true sign of maturity when you're able to recognize that feeling and that emotion, when you are able to validate that and understand that, the way that you feel is valid, but separate that emotion from the way that you react to that person, the way that you talk about them, the way that you perceive them. Jennette does not shit talk Ariana in this book. In the one chapter that she talks about Ariana, she just simply talks about how she felt about Ariana at the time. I think that honesty is honestly a true sign of her maturity and a true sign of her growing up and recovering from all of the shit that she went through. And I think that that's something that a lot of people really need to take note of. How to, heal from envy. How to recognize it. How to validate it, but not allow it to color your perception of things. I don't know why every time I try to film a video I just end up sweating buckets. I hope I don't look like a greasy mess. It's a great book and everybody should absolutely read it. I actually listened to the audiobook and I hadn't listened to an audiobook in a while, so I figured let me give this a try. I had a free credit and I was surprised by how much I was sucked into this story. And I've been noticing lots of people talking about how easy this book was to read, how much of a breeze it was. The way that it was written was just great. Obviously I'm sure she had like editorial help, but I don't think this was a case of like it was a ghostwriter or anything like that. I do think that she sat down and wrote this story and maybe had some guidance, and the way that it was written was just absolutely spectacular. The writing was humorous, it was to the point, it was concise, and it was quite impactful and profound at times. And that, coupled with the fact that all of the chapters are really short, which always makes a book really quick to read, made this such an easy book to just fly through. So I really highly recommend that everybody pick this book up because it's not going to take you long. It's going to leave an impact on you. You're going to learn a lot about Hollywood in the process and the treatment of child stars. And obviously proceed with caution before you read this book or recommend it to people. Content warnings are of course in the description down below if you need to see them. So yeah, that's everything I have to say about Jennette McCurdy's new book. Please buy it, please borrow it, please read it. It was fantastic. Thanks, Jennette, for telling your story. I hope you all have a lovely and wonderful day, and until next time, inshallah, keep reading.